my goal, my hope today is that we finish the book of Numbers. You know, sometimes my plans go awry, so we may or may not get there, but that's the goal anyway. I have a rather aggressive chunk, chapters 26 through the end of 36, but we've covered some of this before, and some of this we're going to cover in summary fashion. As I was preparing for this week, as I read over this, where we are chronologically in the book of Numbers, as you know, as we spent basically 40 years, the book of Numbers starts off with the census taken when the children of Israel are in the wilderness. We studied what happened to them, how God was upset with them because they sent spies into the promised land. They brought back the report, and you know, everybody, all the spies who went into the promised land say, yeah, it is indeed a wonderful land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. But they said, but it's not without a problem because there's some giants in the land. And so 10 of the spies said, we can't do it. We you know, if we go there, we'll get killed, so let's not go. Only 2 of them said, yeah, we can do it. If the Lord is on our side, we have nothing to fear. And as a result of that, what happened?
They were forced to wander in the desert until that generation died out, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua and Moses.
Exactly right. So they wander around. And so here we are when we pick up in chapter 26. This is the census of the new generation. The old generation, as Victor said, has died out. They were, in essence, cursed by God. Because of what? Because of their lack of faith. They didn't believe God. God says, pick up and move into the promised land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. I'll provide for you. I'll protect you. I'll take care of you. This is where I want you to be. Too many of them said, nope, we're afraid, we're fearful. Why don't we just go back to Egypt? And so they died off. And so as I was reading through this, we looked through these last few chapters, what we see here, the preparations for entry into the promised land, which is what's going on here, is really, in my mind, an allegory or a metaphor for our preparation for entering into a sanctified life. That is, entering into the life that God has planned for each and every one of us. And there's a lot of interesting points here that are made as God prepares the people to enter into the promised land that I think we can compare to our lives today. So as we read through this, I made a list of some things up on the board that I want to talk about. The first one, of course, is, you know, one of the things that the children of Israel had to do is they had to confirm their destination. How many times have we read in these books since they left Egypt, how many times did the children of Israel say, you know what, we'd be better off if we'd have stayed in Egypt, let's appoint a leader and let's go back. So for a long period of time, their destination was not certain in their own minds. Many of them wanted to turn back. Some of them, Caleb and Joshua, they were always, you know, they were on the straight and narrow. They said, let's make a beeline for the promised land. That's where God wants us to be, and that's where I want to be. But many of them, hundreds of thousands of them, didn't have that resolve, and as a result, they wound up, you know, wandering around 38 years longer probably than God really wanted them to do, and many of them just died there in the wilderness. So
the trek from Egypt to where they're going, they could have done in a year.
Or much less.
Or less.
That's right. And I think what Victor says is right. God had plans for them. God, you know, God didn't. His plan was never to take them right out of Egypt and move them right into the promised land. Right? There was a time of preparation. He planned to keep them in the wilderness for a certain period of time. I think probably about a year or two. Probably not more than 2 years. They wound up spending 40 years, so it was much longer than they planned. But you know, God wanted to teach them some things while they were in the wilderness. The most significant of which was what?
Trust Him.
Trust Him and to depend upon Him for everything. To learn the lesson of dependence. Exactly right. Learn that He is faithful, He's a trustworthy God. What He says, He will do. And what He says, He wants you to do. Many of them never learned the lesson of dependence, and so they perished.
He wanted them to not just be giving lip service to it, but they kept saying, we can do that.
That's exactly right. So He had something to teach them, but then He wanted them to move on, and they were hesitant to do that. And so, again, for the children of Israel, just like for us, when God calls us into the sanctified life, and God, that call is continuously on us by God, and to be in that sanctified life, one of the things we have to do, just like the children of Israel had to do, is to decide what is our destination. Do we want to go back to where we were before, or do we want to move forward and be where God wants us to be? That decision is a very important thing. And so we see, if you look at chapter 26, this is the census of the new generation. And as you recall, we started out in the very beginning of Numbers with a census that was very similar to this. We don't have to read all this, but I just want to give you the significant number. If you look in Numbers chapter 1, verse 46, after they numbered all of and they weren't numbering everybody, but after they numbered the men who were basically of fighting age, they said in Numbers 1, verse 46, that the total count was 603,550 fighting men. Now, of course, that didn't include the old men, that didn't include the young men, that it didn't include any females. So the total count could have been, 2, 3, 4 million people at this point in time. So there was a lot of them. So they take the same census roughly 40 years later, and that's where we are in chapter 26, the census of the new generation. And if you look in chapter 26, verse 51, you'll see that after they number all the tribes, that the total is 601,730. So it's within about, roughly 1,800 of where they were before. So obviously many had died out, or all of these had died out with the exception of 2, and they had been replaced by the new generation. Okay. At the end of chapter 26, let me just read that for you. These are those who were numbered by Moses and Eleazar the priest. Who is Eleazar? Anybody remember?
Aaron's son,
Son of Aaron. Why is he here, not Aaron?
because Aaron's died off.
Aaron died. Remember, Moses took Aaron and Eleazar up on the mount and basically took all of Aaron's vestments and put them on Eleazar. Then Aaron died, and he was buried in accordance with God's plan. So Moses, these are those who were numbered by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who numbered the sons of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. So they're basically, just on the east side of the Jordan River. But among these there was not a man of those who were numbered by Moses and Aaron the priest, who numbered the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had said to them, they shall surely die in the wilderness, and not a man was left of them except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. So they all died off, except for Joshua and Caleb, and at this point in time, Moses. Everybody else is gone. Okay, then we have in chapter 27 some laws of inheritance. We're not going to go over the details, but here's something very significant about succession in chapter 27, verses 15 through 23. And Lon, would you read that for us?
I'm sorry, but where?
Numbers 27, verses 15 through 23.
Moses said to the Lord, may the Lord, the God who gives breath to all living things, appoint someone over this community. Go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in. So the Lord's people will not be like sheep without a shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom the spirit of leadership, and lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and the entire assembly, and commission him in their presence. Give him some of your authority, as the whole Israel community will obey him. He is to stand before Eleazar the priest, who will obtain decisions for him by inquiring of the Urim before the Lord. At his command, he and the entire community of the Israelites will go out, and his command they will come in. Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole assembly. Then he laid hands on him and commissioned him as the Lord instructed through Moses.
All right, so we have this interesting another ceremony of transition, and this time it's a transition from Moses to Joshua, which I submit to you is a very important spiritual allegory, especially as it relates to entering into the sanctified life. What does this represent to us? First off, what did Moses represent? What's that?
The law.
The law, that's exactly right. Moses is an allegory. He is the embodiment of the law that was given by God. Joshua, by contrast, represents what?
The heaven.
Yeah, represents grace. He stands in the role of Christ. And it's very interesting that as great a prophet as he was, he was the embodiment of the law. He was the allegory for the law. And again, as great a prophet as he was not allowed to enter into the promised land, which is a spiritual message, which is to say that as long as you are led by the law, you'll never get into the promised land. So what we have in this chapter that Lon just read is an allegory for the transition that one must have from the law to grace. In other words, you cannot enter into the sanctified life if you continue to be led by the law. That is, you must now follow, you can no longer follow the law of Moses, but you must follow Joshua, Jesus, under the dispensation of grace. Tremendous allegory there.
So Rick, when he says that, you know, that so Joshua should go to the high priest and he will, you know, for his decisions, he's going to inquire of the, how do you pronounce it?
The Urim, remember they had the Urim and the Thummim, which is
Yeah.
part of the priestly
So do you
vestment.
think, I mean, you know, I know you're not supposed to go to a Savior or anything like this, but is that so that he can only do what color they return or something? It wasn't that he would make a wrong decision if something?
Yeah, that, you know, Lon raised a very interesting question about the role of these strange little devices, the Urim and the Thummim, which was part of the high priest vestment. We don't really know what they were. They could have looked like dice, you know. So you think, well, so you're supposed to determine the will of God by the rolling of the dice? Well, we don't do that, but back then, that was what God told them to do. And so, you know, we have, I think they're told, say, moreover, he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who he shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. I think the idea was that Moses got it, but he wanted to make sure that it was confirmed. And so, you know, Moses said, this is what the Lord told me. What is he telling you? And so Eleazar would take that, he'd roll the dice and say, yep, exactly what it is. You know, what God told you is right. Now, that sounds rather crude, but that's really kind of what they did back then. And God spoke through the Urim and the Thummim.
Well, and it's also a matter of, God spoke directly to Moses,
Mhm.
but he knew there'd be a time when Moses wouldn't be around, and
Yeah.
God really didn't speak. I don't know that God ever spoke directly to Joshua.
Yeah.
So,
But in 18 it says, the Spirit is in him, capital S.
right, the Spirit, but as far as just having that direct, because it's kind of like we say, until the veil was split and Jesus died on the cross, they never really felt they could go directly to God.
Mhm.
So they still had to have that priest as the
Yeah.
intermediary.
Yeah.
And so I guess that was
Right.
the,
That's right.
the form, because he couldn't say God told me necessarily.
Well, God, I think we're going to see that God really did speak to Joshua, but he didn't speak to him the same way he spoke to Moses. I think we see in the scriptures that the way that Moses and God communicated was unique in all the scriptures, you know.
They were face to face.
That's right. It was like, you know, like Lon and I right here, that's the way they were. Now, when God spoke to Joshua, it was more indirect. We're going to see that, you know, and the Lord spoke to Joshua and said, and there was a lot of things there. Exactly how that happened, we don't know precisely, but it wasn't the face-to-face that God and Moses had.
What about when he spoke to Balaam? Did he speak face to face to him?
Tommy asked a difficult question.
I used to don't.
It was an angel of the Lord.
It was an
Spoke to
Yeah.
Balaam.
Right, an angel
Yeah.
of the Lord.
There's no doubt that Balaam communicated with God and God communicated with Balaam. We just don't know how it was. I'm quite certain it wasn't the same way that God communicated with Moses.
Balaam just didn't like what he heard.
No. Well, what he liked was, he liked better what Balak was saying, because Balak had some money, you know. So,
One of those things I wanted to point out before we get past this 27th chapter.
Mhm.
In the beginning, it talks about the special laws of inheritance, and these five bold women came to Joshua and they came to Moses and said, look, we're not, my family's not going to inherit anything because we have our fathers had no sons. And so Moses took that before God, and God said, yes, they should have their inheritance. So he's really changing what was done back then, because the ladies didn't inherit anything.
That's right, that's
So
right.
he's really standing up for feminism, apparently.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
he's a God of compassion. He had mercy on these women who lost their husbands. So that's a very good point. Yeah. And as you say, it wasn't all, you know, men first and women, you know, treated as second-class property. He really did.
Which is pretty much the way the rest of the world did.
They did. That's exactly right.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When you and Lon were talking about face to face, well, if if Moses was speaking to God face to face, how come he put Moses in the cleft of the rock, so
Well,
when
I
his
mean,
glory passed
I
by?
guess they weren't really, he couldn't see God's face, but I mean, I think it was personal, just like at Adam, he walked with Adam. I think he had that relationship with Moses. It was a much more personal relationship than just a statement from him. That's what I kind of think about.
Well, we can only speculate because, you know, the scripture says that nobody has ever seen God and lived. And, you know, and the idea of being in God's direct presence and striking one dead is something that we've seen many times before. So yeah, there are many facets, many aspects to God's revealing himself. It's just that the scripture is clear that God revealed himself to Moses in a way that he didn't do to any other man.
In a
Yeah.
personal way.
Right.
Like, I remember he said he couldn't look upon his face or he would die, so he said, I'll show you a glimpse of my back. And that's when Moses came down, he was glowing.
Yeah, that's
Just
right.
from being in the presence.
Yeah. Yeah, and even after Moses had an encounter with God, he was glowing so much that he had to put a veil over his face so that he didn't intimidate, or they say it might even hurt other people to see God's glory reflected through Moses. But it's interesting here is that it says in what Lon read, and you shall put, speaking to Moses, God says, and you shall put some of your authority on him. And so it's as if the authority that's given to Moses through the law is conveyed to Joshua. Now, how does that relate to Christ, the transition from law to grace and reliance upon Christ? What part of the authority of the law was put upon Christ himself?
He fulfilled the law.
Exactly. That he was the only one who ever fulfilled all of the requirements of the law. So basically, he took to himself all the authority of the law because he fulfilled everything.
Which made him the perfect sacrifice for us.
Exactly. And we'll talk later on. As we get into the book of Deuteronomy later on, we're going to see how the book of Deuteronomy and how, if you will, God's economy is fulfilled through Christ, and everything that Christ did is a fulfillment of the necessities of what's laid out in the law in the book of Deuteronomy and elsewhere. Okay. So then in chapter 28 and 29 we have the laws of offerings, and this is pretty much what we studied when we were reading Leviticus. And obviously these offerings, and we're going to see we have the law of offerings, we have the special 7th month offering, and then in verse 30 we have the vows. These offerings and these vows are a very important aspect of worship. And in this, I think God is reminding the people before they set foot in the promised land that, hey, everything I taught you about worship and making vows is very significant. Don't forget about that. And of course, that is true of us. As we enter into the sanctified life, we should never forget that our worship ought to be in the very center of that. And our vows. You know, we talked before about the various vows that the children of Israel made and what would accompany a vow. What sort of vows do we have in the Christian life? What do you see as the New Testament of equivalent of the Old Testament vows in Christianity?
Well, I mean, if you accept Christ, then I think you basically are saying you're going to change and like I say, go into the promised land, not back to Egypt. You're going to, I don't guess it's technically a vow, but there is a change that would take place.
The idea of the Old Testament vow was if God, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. It was almost sort of a bargain, which is we're kind of admonished to be very careful of that. But there is one sort of a vow that I think is at the center of Christianity. What is that? A vow is what? It's a pledge of faithfulness, right? And so you
take Christ as your Lord.
Exactly.
Like I said, there's a verse that says, believe in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and you're saved. It's not his name, it's lordship.
Yeah.
Like I said, the devils believe in him.
Yeah.
But they're not saved. But believing in him as Lord, and I think it's that vow to make him your Lord of your life.
Yeah, and I think Victor's right on that really it's our vow, if you will, is that the centrality of Christianity is our faith in the finished work of Christ alone and what he did, right? And so I think that's sort of the transition from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Again, at the very heart of our worship, the very heart of our vows is that one truth. That is the finished work of Christ, that Jesus paid it all. Yes, sir.
When I heard the word vow, my first thing that popped in my mind is getting married.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not taking it too serious so long.
Well, God intends for us to take marriage seriously, and that's supposed to be a vow that lasts a long time. And we know that marriage itself is an allegory for our relationship to Christ. You know, we are the bride of Christ. We see that message portrayed throughout, and so I think that's a very good thought, Tommy. That the marriage vow is really at the heart of Christianity itself. Okay, so worship vows, again, a very important part of preparation to enter into the sanctified life. Then we had in chapter 31, we read ahead last time, to the slaughter of Midian. And we know who the Midianites were. They were an indigenous people who were standing in the way of the path of the children of Israel to enter into the promised land. And so God makes a way for the children of Israel to basically totally slaughter the Midianites. But there was a purpose in what he did. And if you look in chapter 31, starting about verse 25, 31:25. Tommy, you want to start reading?
I'm going to pass.
You going to pass? Robert, you want to read for us there?
25.
Chapter 31, verse 25.
The Lord said to Moses, with the help of Eleazar the priest, and of the heads of the ancestral houses of the community, inventory all the spoils captured, human being and beast alike. Then divide the spoils between the warriors who went on the campaign and the whole community. You will levy a tax for the Lord on the soldiers who went on the campaign, one out of every 500 persons, oxen, donkeys, and sheep. From their half you will take it and give it to Eleazar the priest as a contribution to the Lord. From the Israelites' half you will take one captive from every 50 human beings, oxen, donkeys, and sheep, all the animals, and give them to the Levites who perform the duties of the Lord's tabernacle. So Moses and Eleazar the priest did this as the Lord had commanded Moses. This plunder, what was left of the loot which the troops had taken, amounted to 675,000 sheep.
All right, pause right there. Listen to all the plunder that they take after capturing the Midianites. 675,000 sheep. Read on.
72,000 oxen, 61,000 donkeys, 32,000 women who had not had sexual relations. The half share that fell to those who had gone out on the campaign was in number 337,500 sheep, of which 675 fell as a tax to the Lord, 36,000 oxen, of which 72 fell as tax to the Lord, 30,500 donkeys, of which 61 fell as tax to the Lord, and 16,000 persons, of whom 32 persons fell as tax to the Lord. Moses gave the taxes contributed to the Lord to Eleazar the priest, exactly as the Lord had commanded Moses. As for the Israelites' half, which Moses had taken from the men who had fought, the community's half was 337,500 sheep, 36,000 oxen, 30,500 donkeys, and 16,000 persons. From the Israelites' half, Moses took one captive from every 50, from human being and beast alike, and gave them to the Levites, who performed the duties of the Lord's tabernacle, exactly as the Lord had commanded Moses.
All right, pause right there. Now you think, wow, that's a rather harsh thing. The children of Israel come and they basically kill off all this people and they steal all this property. Well, what's the message there? Why did God do that?
Why did he keep so many girls? Tell me that.
I don't have an answer for that. I guess they used them as slaves and servants, but they took a good number of them.
Usually they'd go in and God would have them destroy everything, including the people.
Yep,
It's not to contaminate the Israelites, their faith.
that's right. But what they wind up with is 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 slaves. Wow. Why did this happen?
So when they go into the promised land, they don't start flat broke.
Yeah, they start off, you know, God said, when I take you into the promised land, you're gonna live in houses that you didn't build. You're gonna have farms that you didn't plant. You're gonna have cisterns that you didn't dig. And you're gonna have flocks that you didn't raise. And this is a part of it. This is a part of God's provision for the people. All they had to do was just follow Him and depend upon Him, and He supplied them with all of that. And then jump down, Robert, to read 51 to the end.
All I can say is they didn't have no lawyers back then, did they?
Well, you know, Moses was the chief lawyer.
So do you think that the flocks that they left Egypt with over the 40 years has decreased that much to where they had to replenish them?
You know, you raise a good question. We've discussed that before. When the children of Israel were out in the desert, they didn't have enough to eat, so God provided manna for them, right? When they complained about that, then God gave them quail. But then God also, when He started initiating the sacrifices, I mean, they sacrificed a lot of bulls, they sacrificed a lot of goats, they sacrificed a lot of sheep, even birds. So the question is, you know, how do those two line up? Where did they come from? Well, a lot of them, as you say, would have been given by the Egyptians as they came out. And it could very well have been that they all gotten slaughtered off, so they need to have their supply replenished. And that would have been a tremendous miracle, because you can imagine the people, they're out in the wilderness, they had all these cattle, they've all been sacrificed to the Lord. Now they're saying, all right, so now we've sacrificed and burned up all the cattle, now what are we going to do? And God says, hey, I got a surprise for you. I got 675,000 sheep for you right here, just when you get down to the last one. So God is always, He's always going to provide all of their needs. 51.
Okay. Moses and Eleazar the priest accepted the gold from them, all fashioned pieces. The gold that was given as a contribution to the Lord from the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds amounted in all to 16,750 shekels.
Pause right there. That would have been about 8,000 ounces of gold, which in today's measure would have been about $10 million worth of gold. Not a bad haul just in gold, setting aside animals. All right, read on.
What the common soldiers had looted, each one kept for himself. So Moses and Eleazar the priest accepted the gold from the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, and put it in the tent of meeting as a reminder on behalf of the Israelites before the Lord.
Okay, so there we have a tremendous lesson that as we're progressing, we're down to number 5. As the children of Israel are preparing to enter into the promised land, God provides for them. Just as God calls us into the sanctified life, we may feel like we're running out of everything that we had, everything we built up before, but guess what? He calls on us to trust in Him to do what? To provide us with everything we need. God knows that we get hungry. God knows that we get thirsty. God knows we need clothes. He knows that we need shelter. He provides for us. All we have to do is just trust in Him and do what He says. All right, chapter 32. Kim, you want to start reading there? This has to do with dividing up the land, because the children of Israel now they're really to the point that they can actually see. They're close to the Jordan River. They can see the land that they're going to possess. And the question is, how are we going to possess it, and who's going to get what, and when are we going to settle, and when are we going to go? And this is the part where we learn that there's certain groups of them, they didn't really want to cross over the Jordan. They wanted to stay on the east side of the Jordan. So Kim, you want to read for us?
Yes. The Reubenites and Gadites, who had very large herds and flocks, saw that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were suitable for livestock. So they came to Moses and Eleazar, the priest, and to the leaders of the community and said,
You don't have to read all those names.
Okay. The land of the Lord subdued before the people of Israel are suitable for livestock, and your servants have livestock.
Oh, okay. They said, we have a lot of livestock. Where'd they get it?
From the land.
God just gave it to them. Yeah, we got a lot of livestock, and now we have to deal with it. So we're going to make plans for ourselves. It kind of almost raises a chuckle, doesn't it? Read on.
If we have found favor in your eyes, they said, let this land be given to your servants as our possessions. Do not make us cross the Jordan. Moses said to the Gadites and Reubenites, shall your countrymen go to war while you sit here? Why do you discourage the Israelites from going over into the land the Lord has given them? this
All
is
right,
what,
pause right there just a second. All right, so here we are. Reuben and Gad come up and they say, well, they see this stretch of land to the north on the east side of the Jordan. They say, looks like pretty good land, looks like pretty good pasture land. We got a lot of cattle. I think we'll just settle right here instead of going over, crossing the Jordan River, because what's on the other side of the Jordan?
More heights.
Yeah, we got the giants over there, and we got all these ites. We got the city of Jericho, a fortified city, so that they know they're going to have to fight if they cross over the Jordan River, whereas they're not going to have to fight. And so basically, at this point in time, Moses is calling them chicken. You know, are you going to let all your brothers go across the river and do the fighting while you stay here on the east side? All right, read on, Ken.
this is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barrier to look over the land. After they went up to the valley of Eshcol and viewed the land, they discouraged the Israelites from entering the land the Lord has given them. The Lord's anger was aroused that day, and he swore this oath, because they have not followed me wholeheartedly, not one of the men 20 years old or more who came up of Egypt will see the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not one except Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they followed the Lord wholeheartedly. The Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the desert 40 years, until the whole generation of them who had done evil in his sight was gone. And here you are, a brood of sinners, standing in the place of your fathers and making the Lord even more angry with Israel. If you turn away from following him, he will again leave all this people into the desert, and you will be the cause of the destruction.
So Moses issues a pretty sound warning at that point in time. He says, look, by pausing here, you are basically going against what God said, because he told us to go in and take possession of the promised land. And if we don't go in and take, and again, it's interesting that the promised land at that point in time was deemed to be that which was on the west side of the Jordan River. We know from history that the Jews actually occupied we'll call three territories on the east side of the Jordan. But at this point in time, Reuben and Gad are having some serious questions about going over, and Moses is seeing that as a sign of lack of faith. All right, Susan, you want to pick up from there?
No, 16.
Verse 16, chapter 32.
Then they came up to him and said, we would like to build pens here for our livestock and cities for our women and children. But we are ready to arm ourselves and go ahead of the Israelites until we have brought them to that place. Meanwhile, our women and children will live here in fortified cities for protection from the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every Israelite has received his inheritance. We will not receive any inheritance with them on the other side of the Jordan, because our inheritance has come to us on the east side of the Jordan. Then Moses said to them, if you will do this, if you will arm yourselves before the Lord for battle, and if all of you will go on over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven his enemies out before him, then when the land is subdued before the Lord, you may return and be free from your obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land will be your possession before the Lord. But if you fail to do this, you will be sinning against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will find you out. Build cities for your women and children, and pens for your flocks, but do what you have promised. The Gadites and Reubenites said to Moses, we, your servants, will do as our Lord commands. Our children and wives, our flocks and herds, will remain here in the cities of Gilead. But your servants, every man armed for battle, will cross over to fight before the Lord, just as our Lord says. Then Moses gave orders about him to Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun, and to the family heads of the Israelite tribes. He said to them, if the Gadites and Reubenites, every man armed for battle, cross over the Jordan with you before the Lord, Then, when the land is subdued before you, give them to the land of Gilead as their possession. But if they do not cross over with you armed, they must accept their possession with you in Canaan. The Gadites and Reubenites answered, your servants will do what the Lord has said. We will cross over before the Lord into Canaan armed, but the property we inherit will be on this side of the Jordan. Then Moses gave to the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the whole land with its cities and the territory around it.
Okay, so if you look at a map, and most of our maps got washed away, but you'll see that after Israel settled in the Promised Land, that there are 3 tribes, actually 2.5 tribes, left on the east side of the Jordan River. The Reubenites were left basically to the east of where the Dead Sea is. Directly north of them were the Gadites, who were kind of east of the Jordan River. And then above them was half of the tribe of Manasseh, which was kind of east of the Sea of Galilee in that area. So 2.5 tribes on the east side, and the remaining 9.5 tribes wound up on the west side. Okay. Chapter, you got your map there? Is that what it shows? Okay.
So did history ever say, I mean, evidently, because they said that, God didn't hold anything against them for not going in, right? I mean, or were they ever, I don't know, anything ever done to them?
Well, it's interesting, and of course we'll trace the history when we eventually get there. But you know, at the time of the invasion of the Assyrians, it seems like that the entirety of the northern tribe of Israel was on the west side of the Jordan. And I don't know exactly how these others were disposed of, but we know in the region where Reuben was, that's where the Moabites wound up, just on the east side of the Dead Sea. So the rest of that story remains to be told. Okay. Again?
Moab is just south of Reuben's territory on the map.
Right, and we know the Moabites were constantly infringing and constantly moving up. That was an area of much armed conflict. All right, chapter 33 is interesting because it gives a summary of all the moves that the children of Israel made, and it kind of gives it item by item. And we talked about before about how the tabernacle was originally set up, and then how certain groups of the Levites were assigned tasks of moving the posts and the pillars. One group handled the furniture, one group handled the coverings. But every time God said to pack up and move, what did they do? They had to pack up and move a specific way, and only certain groups touch certain things. Sometimes it said that and you can tell by this summary that sometimes they would have stayed in their camp for must have been a couple of years. Sometimes it said they only stayed a couple of days. So you think about, how many times in your life have you seen that God move you around and you say, all right, now I'm here, and now I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life. Well, guess what? God has another plan. You may not be there for the rest of your life. He may move you someplace you don't want to be. But the idea is wherever God takes you, that's where you need to go. So we have, as we go through here, one of the points is God provides you with provisions for your new, not lift, life. Thank you, Nancy. I know you saw that. God puts you into a specific territory, and one of the things you do that I guess it's almost inevitable that when God calls you into a sanctified life, that you just can't help but review your journey, how you got from where you started off to where you are right now. And I don't know if you've ever done that in your life, kind of said, I started out here. How in the world did I get here? And so we see here it's scriptural that God wants us to review our journey and how He took us from one spot to another. And you're going to see here that in chapter 33, it starts off when they were in Egypt. It says, then the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramesses and camped at Succoth. And you can see here they camped and they camped and they camped and they camped. In verse 15, chapter 33, it says, and they journeyed from Rephidim and they camped in the wilderness of Sinai. Okay, so we know they spent a fair amount of time there. They got instructions. They built the tabernacle in Sinai. And then it says in verse 16, and then they moved and they camped. 17 they camped, 18 they camped, all the way down until they are where they are right now. So let's pick up in chapter 33. Let's see. Victor, you want to read 50 through 56? Some very important instructions. After they get the review of where they've been, the Lord gives them some instructions about what's going to happen when they get into the promised land.
Those verses prior to that, where they went from here to here to here. J. Vernon McGee says, well, this is boring reading, but it's there for a reason. He says it shows you that God was with them every step of the way, and He wanted it shown that He was with them from this place to this place.
Yeah.
He says there's a song, I'll go with Him wherever He goes. Well, we don't always go with Him. You know, we're here in Sunday school, well, where we are Monday. We may not be here.
Yeah.
But He's always with us.
Yeah. And He's got our pathway plotted out, doesn't He?
Yeah. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, say to them, When you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you, destroy all their engraved stones, destroy all their molded images, and demolish all their high places. You shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land and dwell in it, for I have given you the land to possess. And you shall divide the land by lot, as an inheritance among your families. To the larger you shall give a larger inheritance, and to the smaller you shall give a smaller inheritance. There everyone's inheritance shall be whatever falls to him by lot. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the Lord before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land where you dwell. Moreover, it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them.
Wow. Verse 55, but if you, first he says, in verse 50 he says, you shall drive, when you go in there, you drive everybody out and you destroy all their idols and all their high places and everything that competes with me. And he says, but if you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come about that those whom you let remain of them will become as pricks in your eyes and as thorns in your sides. And he says, what? And they shall trouble you in the land in which you live, and it shall come about that as I plan to do to them, so I will do to you. How good a job did the children of Israel do when they actually went into the promised land?
Evidently not.
Not good.
They left some there, and the ones that they left there, were they problems to them?
Always.
Yeah, and they still are to this very hour. They are. You think about what was a group that they left there that became a particular problem in King David's time?
The Philistines.
The Philistines. What did they cause them problems? You know, and the Philistines
Are
were
still causing problems.
in that same area. They lived in the Gaza Strip, and the inhabitants of the Gaza Strip are even to this very hour a thorn in the side of the nation of Israel. And that all could have been different if what? If the children of Israel had just done exactly what God told them to do, just drive everybody out. Consequences.
It's just hard to believe, you know, somebody that saw the splitting of the Red Sea and all these miracles that they saw in the desert, that they can't follow directions.
Yeah.
But they probably weren't born yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Unlike us, who exactly follow God's directions every day, right?
And those guys just can't get it.
That's right. We see it. Why did they get it? You know, I guess the same reason we don't get it. All right, chapter 34. Terry, would you read for us in 34, just 13 through 15?
Moses commanded the Israelites, assign this land by lot as an inheritance. The Lord has ordered that it be given to the 9.5 tribes, because the families of the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh have received their inheritance. These 2.5 tribes have received their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan of Jericho, toward the sunrise.
Okay. Interesting, we're going to see as we go through that God specifically apportions the land to the tribes. I mean, you know, he almost gives it to them by metes and bounds. It's almost like a legal description of property these days. He said, I want this tribe here, I want that tribe here, I want, you know, Benjamin here, I want Judah here, I want Manasseh here, I want Gad here, and he gives it to them specifically. And then he says, you stay here. And we're going to see later on that he even says, you know, if I don't want any intermarrying going on among the various tribes. Why? Why did he do that?
Because
didn't
then
want
they
to-
would mingle their properties together and he wanted them distinctly separate.
Yeah.
You could have one tribe claim ownership of the other tribe, and
Yeah.
Right.
the tribe completely.
Yeah. There really are two specific reasons for this. One of this is that, you know, I always think of the most important tribe as being the tribe of Judah or the clan of Judah. God was always about preserving the lineage of Judah all the way down through, you know, through David and all the way to Christ. So he wanted to make sure that people would see that his promise was fulfilled through the line of Judah. But the other thing is God just wanted them to obey him. When God says, I want you to go to a specific place and occupy and take care of that place and what's in it, that's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to be looking over the fence at your neighbor's property this way or that way and saying, you know, I'd really rather live here or I'd really rather take care of that. No. Go where I tell you to go and stay there. That is your post. That is your assignment. Go there and do that. Okay, there's an interesting section in chapter 35 that I'd like to read that relates to the cities of refuge. Who's our next reader? Is that you, Monica? Pick up in verse 6 if you wouldn't mind.
6:35.
Oh, 35, yes.
6 of the towns you give the Levites will be cities of refuge, where a person who has accidentally killed someone can flee for safety. In addition, give them 42 other towns.
Pause right there. I've got a little note there. If you look in Joshua chapter 20, verses 7 through 9, it'll actually give you the names of those 6 cities of refuge. I didn't memorize all of them. I know that one of them was Hebron, and we've talked about Hebron before, but there's 6 others scattered around. All right, read on, Monica.
In all, 48 towns with the surrounding pasture land will be given to the Levites. These towns will come from the property of the people of Israel. The larger tribes will give more towns to the Levites, while the smaller tribes will give fewer. Each tribe will give property in proportion to the size of its land. The Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, designate cities of refuge to which people can flee if they have killed someone accidentally. These cities will be places of protection from a dead person's relatives who want to avenge the death. The slayer must not be put to death before being tried by the community. Designate 6 cities of refuge for yourselves, 3 on the east side of the Jordan River, and 3 on the west in the land of Canaan. These cities are for the protection of Israelites, foreigners living among you, and traveling merchants. Anyone who accidentally kills someone may flee there for safety. But if someone strikes and kills another person with a piece of iron, it is murder, and the murderer must be executed. Or if someone with a stone in his hand strikes and kills another person, it is murder, and the murderer must be put to death. Or if someone strikes and kills another person with a wooden object, it is murder, and the murderer must be put to death. The victim's nearest relative is responsible for putting the murderer to death. When they meet, the avenger must put the murderer to death. So if someone hates another person and waits in ambush, then pushes him or throws something at him and he dies, it is murder. Or if someone hates another person and hits him with a fist and he dies, it is murder. In such cases, the avenger must put the murderer to death when they meet.
All right, pause right there. All right, so what's going on here? There's a law in place here that we don't really have a whole lot of details about, but the idea is that if anyone is killed, whether they're murdered or whether they're killed unintentionally, the idea is that the closest relative of the dead person is called the avenger or the kinsman redeemer, and he has the right, the legal right, to go and kill that person. The person who did the killing, even if it's unintentional, he has the right, if not the obligation, to go and kill that person. And let's say, you know, that somebody kills somebody unintentionally. All right, it really wasn't murder. He didn't have evil intent in his heart. All right. the avenger, the kinsman and redeemer, could come and kill the one who killed the person, and he, the avenger, would be innocent. No charges could be brought against him. Now what this says is that if the person dies and it really is murder, if somebody has a stone in his hand or a piece of iron in his hand and he kills him with evil intent, he's a murderer, and even if he goes to the city of refuge, he will be tried, and if he's found guilty properly with more than one witness, then he will be executed, and he'll be executed by the avenger, the kinsman redeemer. But the idea is that, again, if you kill somebody accidentally, you may flee to the city of refuge and you will get some relief. The kinsman redeemer cannot go and get you there. And it's interesting how long he must stay. Let's jump ahead, Monica, to read verse 25.
The community must protect the slayer from the avenger and must escort the slayer back to the city of refuge to which he fled. There he must remain until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with the sacred oil.
Read through 28, please.
But if the slayer ever leaves the limits of the city refuge and the avenger finds him outside the city and kills him, it will not be considered murder. The slayer should have stayed inside the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer may return to his own property.
Pause right there. Interesting. So the idea is that if you're a manslayer, if you kill somebody accidentally, okay, you go to the city of refuge and you stay there. And if you go there, the avenger cannot get you. How long must you stay?
To the death of that high
You
priest.
stay there until the high priest dies. And then after the high priest dies, then you can go on about your business. What is that all about? Metaphorical. It is an allegory for the death of Christ as the high priest. The idea being that we flee to the city of refuge where the high priest is. And the idea is that we are in essence freed we are freed on the basis of the death of the high priest. Get the connection? Okay. Again, a very subtle but I think powerful foreshadowing of what Christ did for us. And again, I think it's a hint to let the children of Israel know that Christ, he was the high priest, he is in the city of refuge, and he is the one who will bring about our ultimate freedom.
Rick,
yeah.
Thought I heard that they was to go to trial of some sort. Did they ever get self-defense status, you know?
It did say somewhere in what Monica read about trial by the community, I thought.
Yeah, it says in verse 30, if anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death at the evidence of witnesses, but no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. So the idea is, yeah, if you kill somebody, you're going to have a trial. If you did it accidentally, as long as you stay in the city of refuge, you know, you're not, the community is not going to do anything against you, and the avenger can't do anything against you either. However, if you did commit murder, you go to the city of refuge, you get a temporary reprieve, but you're going to have your trial, and if you're found guilty on the testimony of more than one witness, you'll be executed. And again, the avenger is the one who gets executed. What's that? What's say?
Verse 11 is where it talks about the trial.
Right.
Too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah. There is a justice system in place. Okay. Chapter 36. We're actually going to make it to the end almost. Mm-hmm. Chapter 36. Nancy, would you read for us 1 through 7?
The heads of the ancestral houses of the clans of the descendants of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, of the Josephite clans, came forward and spoke in the presence of Moses and the leaders, the heads of the ancestral houses of the Israelites. They said, the Lord commanded my Lord to give the land for inheritance by lot to the Israelites, and my Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of our brother Zelophehad to his daughters. But if they are married into another Israelite tribe, then their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our ancestors and added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. So it will be taken away from the allotted portion of their inheritance. And when the Jubilee of the Israelites comes, and then their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they have married. And their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our ancestral tribe. Then Moses commanded the Israelites according to the word of the Lord, saying, The descendants of the tribe of Joseph are right in what they are saying. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them marry whom they think best, only it must be into a clan of their father's tribe that they are married, so that no inheritance of the Israelites shall be transferred from one tribe to another. For all the Israelites shall retain the inheritance of their ancestral tribes.
Pause right there in verse 7. Thus, no inheritance of the sons of Israel shall be transferred from tribe to tribe, for the sons of Israel shall each hold to the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. Now, this didn't specifically prohibit intermarriage among the tribes, but you can see here that it was kind of looked down upon, because if there was intermarriage, that property would not go, in accordance with a marriage. It would stay in the allotment. And the whole idea here is what we discussed earlier, that God is the one who divided up the land, and he said, Reuben, you can be here, Gad here, Manasseh here, Benjamin here, Judah here, but I want you to stay right here. There's not going to be any changing of the boundaries. So in other words, and the idea to us is, when God assigns you a place to go, that's where you're supposed to go. And then we'll finish up the reading with the last verses. These are the commandments and the ordinances which the Lord commanded to the sons of Israel through Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho. So there they are. So here we are. We spent 40 years. Our next book that we're going to start next week, Deuteronomy, it actually, and before we get into Deuteronomy, we're going to have a summary of what we read before in the earlier books. But Deuteronomy takes place over a relatively short period of time. It's like the last speech that Moses gives, the last directions that he gives to the people on the east bank of the Jordan River, and right before they enter into the Promised Land. So again, let's take a look at this. Again, I think these chapters are very significant because they deal with historically the preparations of the children of Israel to enter into the Promised Land. But again, I think it's a pretty good allegory. It's a pretty good explanation for us about what God expects of us when he invites us to enter into the sanctified life. And I like how he lays it out so clearly. Confirm your destination. Where are you going? Do you want to go back to where you were before, or you want to go where God wants you to be? You choose the former, what's going to happen? You may wind up 40 years in the wilderness. Take an inventory of where you are. Personal inventory is important. Joshua replaces Moses. In other words, Jesus will replace the law. That's a very important thing. Even too many Christians think that they must live or can live by the law. We can't. One of the things that the children of Israel were taught by the Ten Commandments is what? One. That they can't obey it. These are the commandments. God says obey the commandments. Oh yeah, we can, we will, we have done it. The answer is no. We can't obey the commandments, and therefore we need what? A Savior. We need a Savior. We need a Joshua to lead us where we need to go. Don't forget about your worship. Don't forget about your vows. Don't forget about your Christian commitment. Provisions for a new life. You think about all the things you left behind. I really want those things. No, God will provide for us everything we need in the present moment. All we have to do is trust in Him. Apportioning the new territory. God is going to give us the land that He wants us to occupy. And I think it's interesting too here how we read. He wants you to review your journey. And sometimes you just need to stop and think. And if you do, you'll come to a very profound conclusion. Think, how did I get where I am right now? I started off over here, over there. How did I get right here? And you're going to see that in every major turn, that God is the one who is moving you in that direction. He's constantly moving us, and He moves in sequence. He moves us from where we start out to where He wants us to be. Remember also that we always have a place of refuge. And I really like that story about the place of refuge, that if you are a sinner, there's a place that you can go, and you will be freed as a result of what? The death of the high priest. Our priest has died, and he has set us free to go wherever he wants us to go. And then we forget all too often, when God assigns a place for us or a task for us, that's what He wants us to do. He doesn't want me to do Tommy's job. He doesn't want Tommy to do Robert's job, etc., etc. Stay in your place and do your job. All right. Any other comments?